Ayes
Here we go.
are 232. The nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
So the House has impeached Donald Trump for the second time, but for the first time with Republicans, 10 Republicans crossing the aisle to vote for impeachment, including the number 3 Republican, Liz Cheney, the daughter of a former vice president, in an extraordinary moment, 1 week, almost to the hour, after rioters stormed the Capitol, leaving 5 dead.
The chair announces that pursuant to Section 3A of House Resolution 41, the House Resolution 40 is hereby adopted.
Dotting the I there, but again, as you note, Savannah, President Trump has been impeached again.
Clause 11 of Rule 1, in the order the following of the House of January 4th, 2021, of the following members of the House to the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Jack Mockler again. A U.S. Tomahawk missile with faulty coordinates struck a school in southern Iran, killing 175 people, most of them children, on the first day of an unauthorized conflict. The tragedy, ordered by the Secretary of War, transformed simmering impeachment talk into a full-blown constitutional crisis, as a cascade of investigations and congressional actions followed. The war with Iran had been looming for months, a conflict that many military analysts and foreign policy experts had warned against, but that seemed almost inevitable given the administration's posture toward Tehran. When the first strikes finally came, they were swift and devastating, targeting what the Pentagon described as military infrastructure and nuclear facilities.
Let's bring it.
Mr. Schiff of California, Chair. Mr. Nunes of California.
So we'll continue to keep our eye on the floor, but the action now moves to the Senate. And there is some suspense, Chuck, as I bring you into this conversation into what exactly could happen there. Now, we know something of the when. We know it won't be before January 19th. The Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, has made that clear as of today. He is not going to use any mechanism to try to bring the Senate back in early. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate, had been floating an idea to do that, but that is not going to happen. So we won't see the Senate in session until at least January 19th. But the question is, then what? How might a trial proceed? Will Republicans cross over to convict? Will enough to remove from office or ban President Trump from holding future federal office if he's already left? Because, of course, the other date to mark on your calendar, January 20th, which is the date that the new president is inaugurated.
But the targeting data that guided those missiles was flawed in ways that would become painfully clear in the days and weeks that followed. The elementary school in Minab was just one of several incidents where civilian infrastructure was hit, but it was by far the most catastrophic in terms of human cost. A military investigation later confirmed that the strike had been based on bad coordinates, a failure in the intelligence chain that should never have happened. And when the investigation concluded with that finding, the Pentagon's response was remarkably defensive, dismissing any suggestion of criminal negligence or violation of the laws of armed conflict. But Congress was not so forgiving.
Well, here's one thing I would say. Today's January 13th. The start of this trial is January 19th. We're going to learn a lot in 6 days. We're going to get more. Well, every hour we see more people charged. We learn more information about the plot from last week. There is more facts that are filled in. And ask yourself, how much more will we know on January 19th than we know today? That said, you never know what time does, right? What is that? What does time do? Does time calm the waters in the GOP? Does suddenly Lindsey Graham, who apparently is becoming the chief defender against impeachment for President Trump in the Senate, does he have some success finding, he needs at this point to find to sort of lock in approximately 35 Republicans to do this.
And don't forget the biggest X factor, Chuck, which is President Trump himself. I noted, I noted that President Trump making his first public appearance, his live public appearance yesterday on his way to Texas, his remarks were followed within just a matter of hours by Mitch McConnell, that report in the New York Times saying,
100%.
Maybe he's open to impeachment.
13 House Democrats filed 6 formal articles of impeachment against Pete Hegseth personally, not against the president who authorized the broader conflict, but against the man who had operational command and control over the military forces carrying out the strikes. This was a moment that moved the entire impeachment conversation from political theater into something far more concrete and far more serious. For the first time in recent congressional history, a sitting defense secretary faced formal articles of impeachment, while a simultaneous impeachment push against his own president was also moving through the same chamber.
And it's very notable. I mean, it's Washington. We read into things maybe when we shouldn't, but I thought that was very striking. Last week, Mitch McConnell said, you're not going to have any trial. Don't even think about it. And then within hours of the president saying, a lot of people think what I said and how I conducted myself on the day of the riot was totally appropriate. Within hours, Mitch McConnell with the shot across the bow. Hey, this isn't over.
Look, we're still trying to confirm all of that timing, but I'm with you. I thought the entire thing was, it almost now in hindsight, especially Lindsey Graham traveling with the president yesterday, it almost looked like McConnell was like, okay, I'll give you to the end of the day to see if you can get some sort of contrition out of him. Didn't happen. Literally within minutes of him being wheels up from Texas back to D.C., there's that headline in the New York Times.
Congress had effectively opened two separate impeachment fronts against the president and his war secretary at the exact same time, and the implications of that dual-track accountability effort were staggering. The woman who led the charge against Hegseth was Representative Yasemin Ansari, an Arizona Democrat with a deeply personal connection to the conflict. She stood before cameras and a memorial display of 168 pairs of shoes, each pair representing a life lost in the school bombing, and announced that she was filing articles of impeachment against the Secretary of War for what she described as,
I'm with you, nothing in this town happens by accident. That is something you learn the longer you cover this place. But look, I think that it's the time issue is one unknown factor. But I'll tell you this, I know of a lot of polling that's being done about this, and I'll tell you the Republican grassroots have not abandoned Donald Trump. And none of us know how that impacts some of these Republican senators, right? Are they going to be moved by polls or not? Are there 17 Republicans that are thinking the way it appears Mitch McConnell is thinking and going, you know what? Okay, short-term politics, getting rid of impeachment might be a good idea. But long-term, having Donald Trump around is not a good idea for the party. So maybe we take the long-term vote. And I'll tell you this, if Mitch McConnell is indeed a yes on impeachment, I promise you there are 16 other Republicans that will join with him.
violations of the law of armed conflict, reckless endangerment of American service members, negligence in handling classified information, and conduct that had brought disrepute upon the United States and its armed forces. She was joined by Representative John Larson of Connecticut, who had separately filed 13 impeachment articles against Trump himself over the same unauthorized war. Two Democratic members of Congress filing parallel impeachment resolutions against the president and his defense secretary in the same congressional session over the same conflict, a development that would have seemed unthinkable just a year earlier. Now, let me be absolutely clear about what this headline is actually describing, because the language might suggest something more dramatic than what actually occurred. Hegseth has not literally flipped against Trump or walked into the House chamber and voted to impeach his own boss. What the flip language captures is the way Democrats are characterizing his conduct as a fundamental betrayal of his oath to the Constitution, a betrayal of the rules of armed conflict, a betrayal of the congressional oversight role, and most devastatingly, a betrayal of the American service members he is responsible for protecting. Representative Ansari put it in stark terms when she said Hegseth broke his oath to the Constitution, put U.S. troops at grave risk through the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, engaged in abuse of office and conduct beneath the dignity of his office, and carried out unlawful military actions despite his obligation to refuse them, including strikes on civilians in a girls' school in Manab. This is not casual political criticism. This is a member of Congress putting on the official record that the Secretary of Defense committed what she is calling war crimes. The articles were not filed by fringe members of the Democratic caucus either. They were co-sponsored by John Larson, a senior member of the House who had already distinguished himself as one of the most persistent voices on impeachment matters. Larson's separate articles against Trump covered the unauthorized war, civilian casualties, the school bombing, classified leaks, congressional obstruction, and the abuse of military power. Together, these three separate formal impeachment resolutions in one congressional session against the president and his defense secretary created a documented congressional record that was being built brick by brick around the conduct of this administration. This was not performative politics designed to generate headlines, though it certainly did that as well. This was a formal accounting of what one person's decisions have cost in human terms, in legal terms, and in constitutional terms. Let me take you through the 6 articles of impeachment against Hegseth one by one, because each one tells its own story about how this administration has operated and where the specific legal exposure sits. The first article is unauthorized war against Iran and reckless endangerment of U.S. service members. This one is straightforward in its legal foundation. Congress has the constitutional authority to declare war, a power that the framers deliberately placed in the legislative branch to prevent exactly the kind of executive adventurism that was now unfolding. The War Powers Resolution gives the president 60 days to get authorization or withdraw after notifying Congress of combat operations. Trump notified Congress minutes before the first Iran strikes, but no authorization was ever sought. The 60-day clock ran out while Hegseth was testifying to Congress about budgets, and he argued a ceasefire paused the clock, a claim that multiple senators rejected on the record. The article charges that Hegseth, as the principal military official responsible for planning and executing the Iran operation, is directly responsible for conducting an unauthorized war that recklessly endangered American service members. The second article is violations of the law of armed conflict and targeting of civilians, and this is by far the most serious article in terms of international law. It is centered on the Shajara Tabi Elementary School in Manab, the strike that killed 175 people, most of them children. The Pentagon's own military investigation determined the strike was based on faulty coordinates, a failure in the intelligence process that should never have happened. An independent New York Times investigation confirmed the U.S. military's role in the strike and the death count. The article charges Hegseth with disregarding rules designed to minimize civilian casualties during armed conflict. Under international law and under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, it is a potential war crime to conduct a strike with reckless disregard for civilian harm, and the school bombing is the most documented case of exactly that kind of strike in the entire Iran war. An American defense secretary facing impeachment articles specifically naming a school bombing that killed 175 people, that is where we now find ourselves. The third article covers negligence and reckless handling of sensitive military information, and this is where the signal situation comes into play. Hegseth shared active strike plans for the Yemen Houthi operation in a Signal group chat that accidentally included Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He later shared similar information in a second Signal chat that included his wife, his brother, and his personal lawyer, none of whom had security clearances or any official government role. The Pentagon Inspector General found that behavior endangered American pilots and compromised operational security. The articles charge him with gross negligence in handling sensitive and classified military information. The Secretary of War shared war plans on a consumer messaging app twice, and the second time he shared them with family members who had no business seeing that kind of material. The article says that conduct put service members and national security at grave risk, and that Hegseth has demonstrated exactly the opposite of the responsible information handling that his role demands. The fourth, fifth, and sixth articles cover obstruction of congressional oversight, abuse of power through politicization of the armed forces, and conduct bringing disrepute upon the United States and its armed forces. The fourth article focuses on Hegseth withholding material facts about civilian casualties in Iran and Venezuela from Congress, a pattern of deception that undermined the legislature's ability to conduct meaningful oversight. The fifth article covers a range of conduct, including what the article describes as attempting to punish Senator Mark Kelly, a retired Navy captain and combat veteran, for reminding service members that they have the legal right and obligation to refuse illegal orders. The Secretary of Defense allegedly tried to punish a senator for telling soldiers to follow the law, a development that stunned even seasoned observers of the administration's tactics. The sixth article covers the broader pattern of conduct that has, in the resolution's language, shaken public confidence in the integrity and ability of the Department of Defense, including undermining the U.S. commitment to NATO, which Ansari specifically mentioned in her filing. There is a pattern here that most people are missing about the Hegseth impeachment and why it matters beyond the immediate political moment. Democrats previously pushed to impeach two other Trump cabinet members in this Congress. They filed articles against former Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and they filed articles against former Attorney General Pam Bondi. Then Trump fired both of them. Noem and Bondi are both gone, and now Hegseth is the party's top target. The pattern is striking and impossible to ignore. In each case, Democrats file formal impeachment articles against a cabinet member, and in each case, that cabinet member was fired by Trump shortly after. The correlation is not coincidental. The impeachment pressure, even when it cannot produce an actual removal vote in a Republican-controlled House, creates political cost. It generates coverage, it forces cabinet members to testify, it creates a legal record, and it appears to accelerate the political calculation inside the White House about whether keeping that person is worth the continued exposure. 3 for 3, Noem impeachment articles filed, Noem fired. Bondi impeachment articles filed, Bondi fired. Hegseth impeachment articles filed, Hegseth still serving for now, but for how much longer remains an open question. The Pentagon's official response to the impeachment articles was predictable but revealing. Spokesperson Kingsley Wilson called the articles a charade and dismissed them as just another Democrat trying to make headlines. She said Hegseth would continue to protect the homeland and project peace through strength. That is exactly what was said about Noem when articles were filed against her, and that is exactly what was said about Bondi when articles were filed against her, and both of them were fired anyway. The official dismissal of the impeachment push does not match the pattern because in both prior cases, the pattern ended with Trump deciding the liability outweighed the loyalty. And Hegseth is carrying more documented liability than either of the previous two combined. The school bombing alone is a level of documented controversy that Noem and Bondi never came close to. Add the signal leaks, the congressional testimony contradictions, the war powers argument that senators rejected in real time, and the boat strike that killed survivors, and you have a cabinet officer whose legal and political exposure is genuinely extraordinary. The question is not whether the formal articles will pass this Congress. They will not. The Republican-controlled House will not allow an impeachment vote to proceed. The question is whether the accumulation of those articles and the building of that record accelerates the internal White House calculation about when the liability clock runs out for this particular cabinet secretary. And here is the thing that nobody is saying loudly enough about the Hegseth impeachment articles. Democrats previously filed articles against Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi, both of whom are now gone. Trump fired Noem and fired Bondi, both after impeachment pressure had built around their tenures. The Pentagon press secretary called the Hegseth articles a charade, but that is exactly what was said about Noem and Bondi when articles were filed against them, and both of them were fired anyway. The pattern is clear, and Hegseth is now the third consecutive cabinet member to face formal articles in this Congress. Now let me give you the full picture of who Yasemin Ansari is and why her leading the Hegseth impeachment articles matters beyond just the politics. Ansari represents Arizona's 3rd congressional district, and she is the daughter of Iranian immigrants. Iran is where the school bombing happened, the war that produced 175 dead children in an elementary school is a war that Ansari's own family's country of origin was on the other side of. She stood outside the Capitol with 168 pairs of shoes, one for each of the 68 school children killed, and announced 6 impeachment articles against the man responsible for that war. She said Trump's deranged statements were entrenching the country in another devastating, never-ending war, that the threats against Iranian civilian infrastructure violated U.S. law in the Geneva Convention, and that those who continue to follow him blindly will have blood on their hands. She called the threats against Iranian civilian infrastructure unreal and apocalyptic, noting that Iran is a country of 90 million people and that threatening them with annihilation is a monstrous war crime. These are not my words. These are the words of someone whose personal history and family identity are directly connected to the country where American bombs are falling. And she is putting those words into the official congressional record as part of a formal impeachment resolution. The human dimension of this story is not abstract. It is sitting right in the official filing in the personal history of the member who filed it. The legal foundation for these articles is not some novel constitutional theory either. There is a legal doctrine called command responsibility that holds military commanders liable for war crimes committed by forces under their command if they knew or should have known about the conduct and failed to prevent it or punish it. It is the principle that led to prosecutions after World War II at Nuremberg and after conflicts in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. And it is the principle that legal scholars and former JAG officers have been invoking in discussions of both Hegseth and Trump in connection with the Iran school bombing, the Caribbean boat strikes, and the unauthorized orders that produced both. The 6 articles against Hegseth and the parallel articles against Trump, when read together, are not just political documents. They are an argument about command responsibility reaching from the Defense Department all the way up to the Oval Office. And that argument is now sitting in the permanent congressional record of the current Congress, ready to be cited and referenced for years to come. Let me also give you the broader context of the impeachment resolutions that came before the Hegseth articles because they set the legal framework for everything that followed. Representative Al Green of Texas introduced House Resolution 537 in June of the previous year, formally impeaching Trump for what Article 1 described as abuse of presidential powers by disregarding the separation of powers, devolving American democracy into authoritarianism, and unconstitutionally usurping Congress's power to declare war. That article was filed months before the Iran war even started, based on Trump's conduct in the Caribbean boat strikes, in the Venezuela operation, and in his general approach to using military force without congressional authorization. The resolution said Trump's conduct warrants impeachment, trial, and removal from office. When the Iran war started, that article's language became even more directly relevant because the very thing H.R. Res. 537 warned about, a president unilaterally launching military operations without seeking a declaration of war, was now happening at a much larger scale. Then there was House Resolution 939 filed later that same year, adding to the record with articles covering Trump's call for the execution of 6 veteran lawmakers, a charge that went to an actual floor vote where 140 members voted to advance it. 3 impeachment resolutions against Trump, 6 articles against Hegseth. That is the legislative record being built in this Congress. And every article, every hearing, every vote adds to a body of documented evidence that future Congresses and future investigators can draw on. This is not noise. This is an archive, a documentary record that will outlast this particular political moment and serve as a reference point for anyone seeking to understand what happened during this period of American history. Now let me break down why this moment is a genuine impeachment storm rather than just political noise. The storm is real because it is operating on multiple tracks simultaneously. On track 1, there are formal articles against Trump himself from H.R. Res. 537 and H.R. Res. 939 covering the unauthorized Iran war, the call for lawmakers' executions, and the intimidation of federal judges. On track 2, there are 13 separate articles from Larson specifically targeting Trump's Iran war conduct. On track 3, there are 6 articles against Hegseth. On track 4, there are bipartisan war powers votes that have nearly passed, Senate rebukes, and a documented record of congressional resistance that grows every week. On track 5, the midterm elections are approaching, and Trump himself has acknowledged publicly that a flipped Congress would put impeachment back on the table. 5 simultaneous tracks all building toward the same fundamental question, not whether Trump and Hegseth have done enough to deserve impeachment because the legal case for that question is already being built in the formal record. The question is whether enough members of Congress will have the votes and the political will to act on it. When people say the Hegseth impeachment articles have virtually no chance of passing this Congress, they are technically correct about the immediate outcome. Republicans control the House by a narrow margin, and they will not allow an impeachment vote on Hegseth to proceed. Even if it did proceed, they would vote it down. But framing it as having no chance misses the entire strategic point of what Democrats are doing. They are not filing these articles to win a vote this year. They are filing them to win an argument over the next 2 years. The school bombing in Manab is now in the official congressional record as a specific incident tied to specific articles of impeachment charging war crimes. The signal leaks are in the record. The boat strike that killed survivors is in the record. The unauthorized Iran war authorization is in the record. And every Republican who votes to table those articles is casting a vote that also goes in the record, a vote saying those actions do not rise to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. That vote belongs to them, and when voters go to the polls in the upcoming election, that documented record is a campaign narrative Democrats are actively building. The impeachment articles are as much a campaign document as they are a legal one, and that dual purpose is what makes them strategically significant despite their immediate legislative impossibility. The school bombing in Manab represents the most devastating single incident in terms of civilian casualties, and the Pentagon's own investigation confirmed that American military action caused those deaths at a school based on bad targeting data. In the Pentagon's response to the impeachment article citing that event, they called the attempt to hold someone accountable a charade. Hundreds of people, mostly children, killed in a school bombing that the administration's own investigation confirmed, and the Pentagon calls the attempt to hold someone accountable a charade. That response tells you everything about the posture of this administration toward accountability for what happened in Iran, and it is exactly the kind of dismissive arrogance that fuels public demand for accountability. The command responsibility doctrine that legal scholars have been discussing in connection with both Hegseth and Trump is not some abstract legal theory that will never be applied. It is a principle with a long and well-documented history in international law and in American military jurisprudence. It is the principle that held generals accountable at Nuremberg, that was applied in tribunals dealing with atrocities in the Balkans, and that has been invoked in discussions of American military conduct in previous conflicts. The 6 articles against Hegseth and the parallel articles against Trump, when read together, make a coherent argument about command responsibility reaching from the Defense Department all the way up to the Oval Office. And that argument is now sitting in the permanent congressional record, waiting to be picked up by whoever holds the gavel next. There is one final piece that connects everything together in a way that matters beyond immediate politics. The midterm elections are approaching, and the outcome of those elections will determine whether the impeachment articles that have been filed in this Congress are allowed to proceed, or whether they remain a documentary record of accountability that never got its day in court. Trump himself has publicly acknowledged that a flipped Congress would put impeachment back on the table, which means the stakes of the upcoming election are not just about policy or legislative priorities. They are about whether the formal impeachment process that has been building for months will finally reach its conclusion. The articles that have been filed against both Trump and Hegseth are not going to disappear if the election goes one way or the other. They are going to be waiting on the other side, ready to be advanced or buried, depending on which party controls the House. Everything that has happened in this Congress, every article, every vote, every school bombing investigation is going to land on that election result like a verdict. The documented record of what happened in Iran, the civilian casualties, the classified leaks, the unauthorized war, the obstruction of Congress, all of it is sitting in the permanent archives of the legislative branch, waiting for the moment when someone with the power to act finally decides to pick it up. The impeachment storm that Congress has unleashed is not a passing weather event that will dissipate when the headlines change. It is a constitutional reckoning that is only getting started, and the full consequences of what has been set in motion are still unfolding in ways that nobody can fully predict. The Manab school bombing, 175 dead, mostly children, is the moral center of the impeachment push against Hegseth and Trump, testing whether accountability is still possible. The accumulation of articles, obstruction, and unauthorized war documents is building a record that will await the midterms, when a new Congress must decide whether these actions crossed a line with consequences.